Hello everyone, do you want to know if a servant is good enough to spend your hard-earned quartz on? Then you're in the right place. Welcome to the FGO Gacha Guide. Today our topic servant is the Paladin of the White Feather, Bradamante. Technically pronounced Bradamante, but We will be covering the points we see on screen here. So, to begin with, let us jump into whether or not I think this servant is worth rolling for at all. In my personal opinion, Bradamante is not a very good roll. She's pretty weak, honestly. Despite having Scotty to power her, she cannot loop her NP. She is yet another servant with an unfortunately very weak NP charge as a skill, and at the end of the day, she feels pretty weak, and honestly is. So let's go over what makes her such. Starting with her stats. Bradamante is a 5-star Lancer class servant, meaning that she is strong against archers and weak to sabers. She has 10,833 attack at level 90. This is pretty low for a 5-star servant's attack stat. It's in the bottom 1/4. Meanwhile, her HP is 15,682 at level 90, which is one of the highest for 5-star servants, so she's built like a tank. Her hidden stats show that her NP gain on hit is 0.7%. This is pretty nicely above average, so it helps get her to her MP easier. As for her cards to help with that, her quick card has 4 hits, her arts card has 2 hits, her buster card has 4 hits, and her extra card has 5 hits. Relatively decent hit count overall, with the exception of the arts cards, which are below what you want, which is unfortunate since it's 2 cards of her deck. Her star weight, aka how often she gets crit stars over other servants, is 88. 88 is a little bit below average, so she's going to have a harder time getting stars onto her cards than your average servant. Her star creation rate is 12.1%, a little bit above average, so she can make stars a little bit easier. Doesn't quite make up for the lower star absorption, though. Overall, her stats come out, honestly, a little bit above average, all things considered. So, let's take a look at her deck and her Noble Phantasm. Her deck has 2 quick cards, 2 arts cards, and 1 buster card. It is a non-standard 2/1/2 deck that sacrifices a buster card for an extra quick card. Her Noble Phantasm, Bluclier de Atalanta, is the dazzlingly beautiful, is the glint of the magic shield, is a AoE quick Noble Phantasm. It has 5 hits on it, deals damage to all enemies, has a 60% chance to stun each enemy for 1 turn, and reduces those enemies' critical attack chance by 20% for 3 turns, and finally increases its own NP damage before dealing damage by 20 to 60% for 1 turn, depending on your overcharge. This is an okay NP at a base, but it has some problems. First off, it has a lower hit count than most quick MPs. Most quick MPs are around 8-ish, for the AoE quick MPs that is, which means that it makes it a lot more difficult for her to Scotty loop. It means she needs a lot of extra help. She can't just 2 Scotty and her to reach it. Second, the stun being RNG like this can actually make it difficult to properly determine when you should use defensive buffs to prevent an enemy NP from clearing you. Because it's so unreliable, it actually makes it more difficult to use her Noble Phantasm in challenge fight situations. And finally, this is a bit of a nitpick, but because of the way that debuffs work, the stun will stack with the critical attack chance if you get both of them, meaning that the critical attack chance reduction will only be really 2 turns of effectiveness instead of the full 3. Again, that's kind of a nitpick, but you'll take everything that you can get in challenge fights after all. So moving on, let's take a look at her passives. Her passives are very simple. She has Magic Resistance A. It increases her debuff resistance by 20%, and that's all she has. Not very exciting, not very strong, pretty weak overall. Honestly, she might as well not even have a passive. As for her skills, first off, we have Merit of Claremont. This increases her own quick and arts performance by 20 to 30% each for 3 turns. And this is a fantastic self-buff, to be perfectly honest with you. This buffs 5 out of 6 of her cards for damage dealing, which includes her MP. And by a pretty respectable amount. 30% increase for 3 turns is pretty darn good. That's what you'd see on even a single color buff for 3 turns most of the time. So not bad. Not bad at all. Next up, we have Paladin of the White Feather. This gives herself Gut status, 1 activation time for 3 turns. It'll heal by 1000 to 3000 HP based on level. And it increases her own defense for 3 turns between 20 to 30%. This is honestly a very selfish skill that's mostly only useful in challenge fights against groups of enemies, so I'm not really a huge fan of it. It's niche on when you would apply this in the first place, and more often than not, when you're doing challenge fights, trying to stall them out with a quick team is very difficult because Scotty doesn't provide very many defensive buffs for you. She's more about pure offense. So Bradamante doesn't take as much advantage of that with this skill. So honestly, this is kind of not the best skill in the world for the type of servant that quick servants usually are in the first place. Doesn't really mesh together well. Finally, we have her third skill, Thaumaturgy Sanctification. This charges an ally's NP gauge between 10 to 20% and removes their debuffs. This skill fucking sucks. Straight up. Excuse my French, but we're talking about a French servant, so it's fine if I curse. 20% single target MP charge at max level is awful, unless there is at least a strong buff tied to it. Removing debuffs is decent, but it's not good enough. It's only debuff removal. It needs something more than that. Maybe an application of multi-turn defense or a multi-turn buff, but this is just not good enough. It's just not good enough. This skill is garbage compared to so many others. Whoever designed it should be slapped, especially when there are ally target charges of 50%, AoE full team charges of up to 30%. This 20% single target charge is just terrible. It is so underwhelming. So, with these skills, you can see that Bradamante has a mix of offensive and defensive buffs with a little bit of utility. She's kind of a jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none type, which unfortunately is not good for Fake Go. In Fake Go, you want a servant to focus on one job and do it as well as possible, due to there being just honestly so few mechanics you can hit at once. For a utility servant to work in Fake Go, they would need a lot more little mini buffs than what Bradamante is bringing to the table. This is honestly just nowhere near as powerful as it needs to be. She either needs more things to do for the utility, or she needs to focus harder on dealing that damage. Right now, she's too much of a mixed bag, and so she kind of falls short of her competition because of it. But as always, roll with love. And what materials do we need to level these skills if you're going to roll for Bradamante? Well, honestly, she's not too bad. For each skill, she takes 30 medals of Great Knights, 44 proofs of heroes, 24 seashells of reminiscence, and 24 Aurora steels. So in total, to max out all 3 of her skills, that'll be 90 medals, 132 proofs, 72 seashells, shields, and 72 auras. Aurora. Yes, those. 72 soapstones. Very good. Honestly, that's not too bad for her. The Auroras are the newest material needed. If you have been pulling lately and you've been getting a lot of the newer servants, you might have already spent a lot of them, and that might be a difficult bottleneck. If you're a relatively newer player, then the high cost of the proofs of heroes is probably going to be the thing that really hits you. And the shells of reminiscence, which only tend to show up a little bit less often than you'd want them to. But overall, if you've been playing the game for a little while, these are pretty easy to have a stockpile of 3 out of 4 of the materials, with the Auroras being easy to stockpile if you haven't gotten too many of the new servants. So overall, pretty easy to fill her costs. Now, how does she stack up with her competition? As a 5-star AoE Lancer, her main competitions are Karna, Artoria Lancer, and Ereshkigal. I'm additionally going to compare her to the 4-star Lancers Parvati and Valkyrie, because those 2 are also quick AoE Lancers, and there are no other quick AoE Lancers in the 5-star category. Unfortunately for Bradamante, while she has one good damage increasing skill, in terms of her damage output, she is surpassed by Karna and Artoria. In terms of NP charge, she is outclassed by Karna, Artoria, and Ereshkigal. In terms of Scotty looping capabilities, she is outclassed by Parvati and Valkyrie. At the end of the day, she's just outclassed. And Bradamante not being able to NP loop with double Scotty without extra help, such as higher MP levels like MP3, the use of Fragment 2004's bonus MP gain, or another servant's help like Nero Bride, really hurts her usability and lowers the flexibility of her party compositions. Whereas Parvati and Valkyrie both are able to do that just fine without any outside help, just 2 Scotties. And even just at NP1, they can continue to Scotty loop. Bradamante honestly sits below all of her competition in pretty much any situation that you can think of, which is unfortunate for her. But if you're rolling for love and you roll for Bradamante, I'm sure you want to know what skills to prioritize in leveling. I would suggest leveling her first skill first, focus on that. It is a 3-turn uptime with only a 5-turn cooldown, so only 2 turns where this is not active. A 30% damage increase on almost every card is very nice. And I would follow it up with her 3rd skill. And the reason for this being is not because the 3rd skill is great or anything. It is because, as an NP charge, it has a baseline level of strength that can't be ignored. Even if it's a terribly weak NP charge, it's still an NP charge. But more importantly, the real reason for it is because her 2nd skill only has any bearing whatsoever in challenge fights. Outside of challenge fights, difficult enemy fights, especially ones against an AoE set of enemies, which is where you're going to want to bring her, there's no reason to use this. And those fights against AoE enemies are actually very rare. Most challenge fights are against single target enemies, so Bradamante isn't really the best choice in the first place. So really, that 2nd skill of hers is most of the time completely useless. Thus, you can kind of ignore it for as long as you want. Now, as for how to gear her with craft essences, Bradamante is an NP shooting servant for her main damage. She doesn't have any critical buffs, so we want to focus on quick up, NP generation up, NP damage up, starting charge, that kind of stuff. Kaleidoscope's actually a pretty darn decent CE for her, because you can start with an 80% NP charge, and then her 3rd skill at max rank will allow her to be self-sufficient to shoot her NP just with her own skills. So that's pretty nice. As for increasing her damage, One Summer is, in my opinion, one of the best, if not the best, CE to throw onto her, and is an event CE, so it should be max limit broken for anyone that has it in the first place. It provides 10% quick up, 10% MP damage up, and 50% starting charge. It is definitely my favorite choice if I were to choose a CE for her. For backups, we have Magical Girl of Sapphire as a very good choice. It gives her 25% or 30 at max limit broken, increased MP generation, and 40% or 50% starting NP gauge. And finally, a very old CE that longtime players might have, Halloween Petite Devil, which gives a 20 or 25% at max limit break, increased MP generation with a 50 or 60% starting MP charge. I think these are all fine choices for Bradamante to make use of. So, as for servants to group her up with, as always, we have Waver. Waver is pretty self-explanatory. He is good for any servant in the game, really. 50% allied charge, some attack up, some defense up, some critical up. All very good for anyone you can think of. But the honestly best servant to pair her with is, of course, Scotty. As Bradamante is a quick servant, Scotty is without a doubt the best servant to support her with. Scotty brings 50% ally MP charge, 50% quick up, and 100% crit damage up on any quick cards that crit. So Scotty is a massive, massive damage increase. Next up, we have MASH. Everyone has MASH, so this is good news. But the one qualifier is generally, this is only for challenge quests. Now, MASH in her starting form, with her defensive buffs, her MP plus her first skill combined with Bradamante's second skill, you can easily reach 80%. You easily reach 80% defense increase, with 100% being reached either through overcharging MASH's MP or more easily reach through having a defensive CE, which will make you immune to damage for a couple of turns, unless the opponent has defense pierce, buff removal, or defense reduction to fight back. So that's a very nice combo to have. And next we have Nero Bride. Nero Bride is the support that exists to help Bradamante be able to Scotty loop. She's the third support necessary to unlock Scotty looping, really. She has 45% extra MP generation to allow Bradamante to reach that extra NP gain that she needs to be able to loop through Scotty. So Too Long Didn't Watch for anyone here. She's honestly not a good role. She's pretty poor. In a world where Scotty looping is dominating the farming meta, a quick servant who comes out who can't do so unless she has a bunch of extra help feels weak. And honestly, she kind of is weak. Her biggest strength is in challenge fights due to her durability, but her damage output is beaten out by her competition. Even in challenge fights, overall, you don't want the fight to last too long, especially if you're running a quick setup, because Scotty has no real defensive buffs to help you with longevity. Bradamante honestly needs some minor buffs to be up to par. But if you need a really good reason to roll for her, she has very impressive assets to work with anytime you MP. Yes, very impressive. So if you enjoyed this video, check out my Twitch channel, all that. Let me know how you feel about Bradamante. Thank you very much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you guys next time. Good luck on your rolls.